it's generally been a winery and the marketing manager setting prices. And today it's the consumer that can set the price. And we're very, very happy for that, because that was one of the aims of what we're trying to achieve.
So shooting into, let's look at some of the local varieties now. So these are some of the highest performing wines on the sale. I was interested, and I wanted to point out to everybody that just a structure of the auction is that our in session one, which is the session that I've currently got on the screen, and we've got our specialist picks. And I just wanted to make sure, I think it's a nice place to start, because, in here, we've got, I suppose, two notes that I've noticed recurring through the sale is one from the Sardi family, and two from quite a blend that sort of permeates the sale as the Syrah. So I think who's going to speak to me?
Yeah, I'll kick this off. So really, when you talk about the Rhône Valley, it's two halves. You've got the northern Rhône and the southern Rhône. The northern Rhône is Syrah, and the southern Rhône is Grenache. Even though it's the same region, the two parts are very different in their climate. So up north, it's cool, it's more continental, and as you drive down south, the scenery changes. It's much more rolling hills. It's much warmer. The Frenchmen tend to speak with a little bit more of a country accent. The food gets a bit richer, and it's a little bit more country-like. And the wines there tend to be a bit riper and richer in style. So you've got Grenache on the one hand and Syrah on the other side. South Africa really only got Syrah into South Africa in it's been around so the last part of the century, but in the 80s and 90s it started becoming famous. So we haven't been making Syrah for very long in South Africa. But the one that you've got on the screen is very, very important. This is Porcelain Berg 2011. And the story actually starts in 2000 with this wine, and a winemaker called Sardi, who you might have all heard of. And his first vintage of Columella contained a large a crop of this Syrah from this special mountain called Porcelain Berg. And it's, if you know the Swartland, it's about 10-15 kilometers as the crow flies southeast of Riebeek Kasteel. There's a little mountain range, and this little vineyard produced incredible Syrah. So Sardi wanted to continue using this, but there was very little planted, unfortunately. And in 2008, 2009, a Boekenhout's Kloof and the Vinimark team bought this property and started a wine label called Porcelain Berg. And the 2010 came out, and it was just so different to what we'd made in South Africa before. It was much more Rhône-like in character. It came off these very schistious soils, very rocky soils, which produced very rich, tannic, long-aging, very spicy and charactered style of wine, and very low yields in this very dry, rocky climate. So 2010 was the first vintage. 2011 came along, and it was a serious drought vintage, and they were only able to make about 900 bottles of this wine, and they decided not to release it. So it never got out into the market until now. We convinced the proprietor, Kalilo, to offer a few cases on the auction. So this is really super rare. You don't get more rare than this in terms of South African Syrah. And since then, it's been getting accolades left, right, and center. Tim Atkin gave it the highest score last year. So did a wine advocate, Neil Martin. Before that, it's been garnering 5-star platters. This, if you like Syrah and you like Northern Rhône style of Syrah, this is the wine. It's just incredible.
And now talking about Sardi, Higgo, that I suppose brings us to the Columella that you've got in front of you now, don't you?
Yeah, so just another little attribute or comment to make on the Porcelain Berg. It's probably one of the few, if not one of the only wineries in South Africa that only has one wine. That's the only wine they produce.
Oh, really? Oh, yeah.
So it just shows the absolute focus of a property like that. So I just wanted to add that on. But then back onto the Columella, that's from the provenance of that is from a private collector, but it's really well kept, well stored, great provenance. And you know, the Columellas, the early vintages, it's staggering when we think about it's actually only started in 2000. So this wine is only 20 years old, not even, because the current release would be 2016 or 17. So it's not even 20 years old in terms of a track record, and it's already one of South Africa's most famous, if not the most coveted red wine in SA. And it's all really been attributed to what Eben, and then along with some other producers, what's known as the Swartland Revolution now. That's really revolutionized the fine wine scene of South Africa in terms of focused production. And the Rhône varieties has played a massive part in that. And I want to go back to the identification of this as a theme. Roland explained now the north and the south. And if you look especially with the southern Rhône, it's Mediterranean climate, it's warm climate. And, you know, if you look at historically what South Africa does with wine production, we have a lot of the noble grape varieties. So we have a lot of the French grape varieties because of our history and our context. But these varieties, especially the Bordeaux ones and the Burgundy ones, especially Burgundy, they don't adapt well everywhere. They don't suit well everywhere. They're sensitive to heat, and we plant them and they work best in the cooler pockets. Where a variety like Syrah and Grenache is extremely forgiving with heat, with droughts, with dryland farming. And what Eben's done, and what many of the best producers in South Africa now do with the help of very good viticulturists, is to go and identify the best sites with old vineyards, and just getting these incredible characters out of our soils. And for the first time, South Africa is sort of being allowed to be ourselves. We're making these incredibly unique wines. We're not trying to compare them with the rest of the world. They have an identity of their own. And I think Colomella's perhaps, at least one of them, if not right on top of that list of wines that have a sense of South African identity. So this is just a little vertical collection, 4 bottles of wine, 2003 to 2006, but they're super rare to find now. This, for the private collector, this will give a very nice little view into early vintages of this iconic wine. At the moment, I think they're sitting at around 8,000 Rand for the lot, so 2,000 Rand a bottle. If you think about the best famous Rhône wines, that's probably about a quarter of the price, if not a tenth of the price. So it's still a bargain.
Yeah, I'll just add there, in 20 or 50 years' time, we're going to talk about Ibn Sardi in a Godfather-like way. He really has kick-started South African fine wine. There's no one else in South Africa that has put South African fine wine on the map like Ibn has. And it wasn't easy this first decade that he produced the Columella. He's now famous, but in those first vintages, he was really an outlier, doing things that no one had done. And we were lucky enough to taste the vertical with Ibn and the Strauss team last year. And I think everyone will agree how wonderful those wines are today. And sure, I think I'm going to bet on this a lot if it doesn't go much higher.
Tell me, if you guys, just out of this lot, just a layman's question, but what do you think out of your experience of the vertical tasting of this lot? How's the wine age from through the vintages?
Well, we tasted them recently, and I put my notes alongside it. So each vintage is different because they do have drought vintages in the Swartland, and they do offer different expressions. So you can taste a cooler one like 2004 versus a hotter one like 2003. And the wines are quite different. If I bought this lot, I think I'd invite my 5 best friends over for dinner and open up all 4. For sure.
No, fantastic. So that's definitely an Easter Sunday sitting. Yeah.
Shall we move on to some of the other lots,
fantastic.
Matthew?
So what do you want to look at? Let's run through some of the.
Why don't we start from the top, because I think everyone deserves a comment. What's been really amazing is that how much has come out of the South African market. We've literally had people coming out from all over South Africa saying, I've got this wine, can we sell it? And that's been the fun part for Higgo and Wine Cellar. We're able to taste and check these wines and make sure they're of auction quality. And then, of course, we're asking producers what stock they have in their vinoteek. And this wine, the Boekenhoutkloof 2005, is straight from the Boekenhoutkloof cellar. And we had a wonderful function in Stellenbosch a couple of weeks ago at the Woordfeest, where this was paired with one of the courses, and it was just incredible. 2005 was a great vintage for South Africa. And this specific wine actually won Mark Kent the Diners Club Winemaker of the Year in 2007. So this wine hasn't been on the market for 10 years, 12 years, and it's just great to see it again. It's not quite in the Northern Rhône style. It's a little bit richer and fuller and bigger in its sort of stance, but it still has wonderful delicacy, freshness, and floral notes. And I actually drank a bottle last week, and it was an amazing experience.
I think something that sorry, Matthew, something that's worth noting here. You know, I've had quite a few questions coming my way about people asking whether these South African older vintages of South African wines are just collector's items, or whether you could actually buy them to drink them. And I think we shouldn't like underestimate how little our South African market knows about how well our wines keep. So this is now a 15-year-old South African Syrah, made in quite a modern, bold, full-bodied style. But this wine, you know, I was at this dinner, the Woordfeest dinner that Roland's talked about. Roland hosted one evening, I hosted the other. I opened this bottle, decanted it, and served it about 3 hours later. And only towards the end of the evening, in the glasses and in the decanter, did this wine start opening up. So we're talking about a 15-year-old wine that's quite ripe and quite bold. So it's not, what I mean with that is it's not made super tight. It was quite expressive already in its youth, but it's, this wine still has a lot of power in it, and probably still quite a bit of ageability. But in my opinion, it's drinking wonderfully now. It's perfect maturity at 15 years. And the point that I'm trying to make is we haven't listed anything that's something that you should buy and put in your bar as a showpiece. They're all wines that are drinking very well now, or should be stored for further.
Yeah, Higgo's put on has had a really good point there, that we're still finding our path in South African wine, even though we've had grapes planted here for 300 years. It's with apartheid and being at the tip of Africa, we've really only started making fine wine one generation, maybe 2 generations back, and planting the right varieties in the right soils in the right places. We're only just getting the tip of the iceberg, and these wines are going to be sought or looked at as the beginning of greatness, and they're going to be truly rare, and they're going to keep for another decade or two, which is even more fantastic. So there's 4 lots of the 2005, and that's just a wonderful wine. For anyone like Syrah, this is a wonderful wine.
And so looking then at the next, we've got 2 lots by Boschkloof. Do you want to?
Yeah, I think we should definitely talk about that. Higgo, maybe you want to comment?
Yeah, so Rhône Boorman, Boschkloof has been going for quite a while. Jacques Boorman established it just after leaving La Motte in Franschhoek. We actually have a couple of La Mottes, the Pierneef lots on, which is also undervalued, but we will get to those. But then Jacques Boorman established Boschkloof, I think somewhere around the late 90s. And, he's always made consistently good wines, perhaps even in some vintages more than good, perhaps even great. And to the extent that he's been included in the Cape Winemakers Guild, etc. So Boschkloof has had a great reputation. But with the inclusion of Rhône, it has without a doubt taken another step upwards. Rhône, many international commentators are calling Rhône, along with maybe a handful of others, the next generation of South Africa's great wine minds, probably the best way to put it. And Rhône has elevated these wines, and from around 2014, 2015, he started elevating them to a new level. And this epilogue, Syrah, was identified by Tim Atkin as his red wine of the year. And that's obviously also catapulted the brand forward quite a bit. But the wines from the next generation from Rhône's hand has just started taking a little bit more of an elegant expression, a little bit more finesse, but certainly will be long-lived. And it's a wonderfully perfumed, floral expression of Syrah. It's a great wine.
Yeah, maybe that's a good point, just to talk a little bit about style. I think when we talk about Syrah, because it's such a versatile grape variety, we can get some Syrahs that are very Pinot Noir-like, very elegant, very fine, and very fragrant. And then you can get Syrah, which is big and bold and rich, and generally then it's called Shiraz. So you need to find out which producer makes the style that you enjoy most. And the notes should tell you that, and through tasting, you should also learn that. But Syrah can easily be 12.5 alcohol and very light and lean and pure, but it can also be 16% alcohol and like a smack in the face, a good smack in the face.
Well, no, thanks for clarifying that, because I've always been under the impression that Syrah is more akin to a Shiraz, more of a heavier wine. You want to eat it with meat. You want to eat it like it's a weather for next to a fireplace in the afternoon. I had no idea that you can find some lighter variations of it.
Well, if you maybe flip to the Molyneux, that would be a good place to start, because if there is a more elegant style, that's probably where you're going to be looking. The Molyneux is also another incredible story in that they only started their winemaking project, so Molyneux, MUL, in 2008. And in the last decade, the Molyneux have become the most successful wine producer in the entire country. I think Platter have given them wine producer of the year 3 or 4 years. So these wines are definitely more on the lighter side, 13% alcohol, less oak, showing the floral expression of Syrah. And they age very well too. So, there's a lovely vertical from 2008 to 2011. Recently tasted through all their Syrahs, and they're all in fantastic shape. And maybe that's a comment to be made. Often the big, sweet, very bold wines, they show very well early, but they don't blossom with age. Whereas the wines that are picked maybe a little bit earlier, that show off a little bit more of the red fruit, they're a little bit more coiled. With time, they tend to blossom and show more character and complexity.
Yeah. Matthew, maybe just to answer your question there a little bit. So Syrah and Shiraz is exactly the same thing. It's just two different names for the same variety. And Syrah is what the French label it more, and then Shiraz, sort of more of the New World, Australia having championed that style a little bit. So it's just a difference of a stylistic expression. But the point being that you can make any grape variety into any style depending on the winemaker's hand. And the revolution of wine, not only in South Africa but around the world, is for wines to become more maybe elegant, more pure, a little bit lighter, more delicate. And the reason for that is that if you have that, then you taste less of the winemaker's hand, and you taste more of the expression of the site, more of the sense of the place where it comes from. And that's obviously a better art form than, that's really why people get into wine, isn't it? Because you want to have a memory or
a connection.
A connection to a place. Yeah, exactly. So the Molyneux.
No, sorry, Higgo. No, I was going to talk about the Iron Syrah, because I see there hasn't been a bit on that yet. And folks, that's one of the best wines in the entire lineup. Not only the highest scoring, but the Molyneux searched for 5 years to get to find a terroir to produce this wine. It comes from iron-rich soils in and around Malmesbury, and this was the Platter Wine of the Year, the best red wine in South Africa a couple of years ago. And you put this up against any Côte Rôtie or any wine from the Rhône, and it'll deliver. It's just a truly fabulous wine. So much complexity and length.
So I see a questions just coming, guys. Sorry to introduce questions at this stage, but I've got a query. Somebody that's looking to place bids on, and he's asking between the estimates between lot 3, 653 and 654, and he's just wondering if the vintage really, I suppose, determines the estimates on those lots.
Yes and no. It's often the seller that will put down a reserve or an estimate that we discuss, and sometimes we think it might be a little on the high side or a little bit on the low side. But if there are sellers out there that won't go below a certain price, so be it, and that's why they're listed as such.
I see those two lots are both catching bids, so that's indeed encouraging. So, gentlemen, what would you like to have a look at next?
Just quickly before we step off the Molyneux, if I can just add something there. So, Chris and Andrea Molyneux was one of the early players in the Swartland, so they were certainly responsible, along with even Sardi and maybe Adi Bardenhorst would be the other name to mention there, for what's known as the Swartland Revolution now. So they're not new players in the Swartland. They've been going a long time. They've been making the Malin Syrah since 2008. So that's why that little vertical of 8 to 2011 is a great collection, because it's starting with the debut of 2008. But they started with the Syrah, and as they were going, they were identifying that these individual sites that they're making the wines from, meaning the iron, the schist, and the granite, are actually individually giving them unique expressions. So they then started bottling minute quantities of those vineyards separately, and then the blend goes into what's known as the Malin Syrah. But I wouldn't say it's necessarily a quality difference. It's more just of a stylistic difference. And the Malin Syrah is, in my mind, or in my opinion, better value because it didn't start at as high price points as where the single vineyard ranges starts from. So they're still building the price bracket upwards. And, you know, to be buying a wine like so this little flight, the 2009 got Platter 5-star, the 2010 got Platter 5-star. It's just a wonderful collection. And similarly to the Columella vertical, it's going to allow a private collector a great little view on the start of Malin Syrahs, and they're all still drinking wonderfully. Just another thing that I wanted to mention before we step off Boschkloof, you know, we throw around these accolades like Platter Wine of the Year and Tim Atkins Wine of the Year, and I realize that there's been a lot of criticism coming in the way of the critics of saying that there's something called score inflation, saying that, you know, the critics are trying to catch attention, so they're giving higher scores to get attention onto themselves. Maybe there's something similar in the art world, I wouldn't know. But the facts of the matter is, if you get an accolade like Platter Wine of the Year or Atkin Wine of the Year, they taste around just below 2,000 wines in the year. So if you're getting, you know, the problem almost with a lineup of highlights like this is these accolades are starting to look a little bit diluted. But if you look at them in isolation, to be the Platter Red Wine of the Year, that's 1 in 1,000. To be the Tim Atkin Red Wine of the Year, that's 1 in 1,000. It's incredible awards. The Boschkloof Epilogue scored 97 out of 100. Now, whether that's an inflated score or not, 10 years ago, 20 years ago, international critics very seldomly gave South African wines above 90. So we really have to just consider how great these wines are. And now they come with great provenance, and they're drinking perfectly. So
could we, Matthew, go to De Trafford? That would be a nice one to talk about, because we've been a bit Swartland centric at the moment, and we mustn't forget about Stellenbosch. De Trafford has been making great Syrah from the 90s, much like Hartenberg. These wines have had a reputation for longer than the rest. And I'm looking at some of these prices, and they're looking really good. I think I'm going to jump in here too. But if we just take a look at the 393 2011, lot 633 and onwards, this wine was the highest rated wine in America for about 5 years. It got 96 points from Wine Spectator, and it was just the highest rated wine at the time. But this is a big wine. This wine is 16% alcohol, and it really is immense. It's picked from this little vineyard very high up on the De Trafford property, and it's picked quite late. But what's amazing about David Trafford's wines is he makes them very naturally. He doesn't add anything to them, and they keep forever. I've tasted pretty much all of his wines going back to the early 90s, and not one has ever been past its sell-by date. There's unbelievable balance to these wines. So if you like something bold and rich, and you want to put it up against a charred rump or sirloin, then this is the one that really is going to be for you. And extremely rare 2011 vintage with that 96 points.
Amazing. And any other highlights in the De Trafford?
Well, he's got some big formats there as well. So you know, those are really, really, really rare, and you'll only make a few of those bottles every year. And to have a 10-year-old in 3 liter, you know, that's just that's an incredible purchase. So you know, this is his most famous wine, the 393. He's also a guild member, and he's also one of the best. So yeah, maybe we should talk about the Hartenberg as well, because yeah, the Hartenberg has also been making great Syrah or Shiraz for a very long time, and because the whole Swartland revolution seems to have taken a lot of the limelight, we've maybe forgotten a bit about Hartenberg. But you know, these are the two great wines from Hartenberg, the Gravel Heel and the Stork. And these wines are they age just as well as the Trafford, and they're a little bit more elegant in style. What do you think about these, Higgo?
Yeah, it's a good one to jump to. Also, a Stellenbosch producer. Hartenberg was one of the first vineyards to bottle, if not the first, but because I'm under correction, I'll say one of the first to bottle single varietal Syrah in the country. And the first bottling was actually this Gravel Hill Shiraz, but it wasn't under the Hartenberg label, it was under the label of Montaigne. So this vineyard used to be owned by the Finlayson family, who listeners would know if they know South African wines. The Finlayson family, quite famous, now been involved with Bushard Finlayson, Edgbaston, Glencarlo, etc. So it's a big South African wine family. And yeah, since 1978, this Gravel Hill vineyard, so that's the same vineyard producing a wine, and it's always just been produced under the Cape Winemakers Guild label, and they've only recently started releasing the wines also commercially under the Hartenberg label. They're super age-worthy. You know, Carl Schultz has been the winemaker there for 25 years. He is one of the most consistent quality winemakers in the country, just because of his focus and of his association with the same brand and the same vineyard for so long. So these wines are, you know, they maybe don't have the superstar status, but they're a great Stellenbosch stalwart and a very typical quality New World Shiraz producer. So that's certainly something that I think is...
Yeah, to comment on the price there, if you were to buy the CWG Gravel Hill, you're going to pay at least 1,500 Rand a bottle. So you know, this for 1,000 Rand and it's 15 years old really does offer value.
And it's a very good vintage. 2005 is a top Cape vintage. So that's certainly a top wine. And then the Stork maybe just a different sort of style. The Stork is a little bit riper in its expression. But then we see it from the 2006 vintage as a little bit of a cooler, leaner vintage. This is named affectionately after the current owner of Hartenberg is Mackenzie, I think Ken Mackenzie, and apparently his body shape is similar to that of a Stork. So while he was a World War pilot, they nicknamed him the Stork. So the wine is named after him. I don't think this is a single vineyard expression like the Gravel Hill, but it's a little bit maybe meatier and riper in its style, but also a very age-worthy wine and also a top Shiraz.
Matthew, maybe you can go back to that producer screen, because that's quite a handy one to look at. If you are browsing, you can see all the producers there. Maybe we can go to another producer.
I'd like to just roll on to Cederberg after Boschkloof, because there's also, you know, I think that's another producer that's going a little bit under the radar. There's some 2002 Cederberg's Shiraz on the sale. And as you can see, there's a starting bid open. So one of the lots haven't even been bid on. This 2002 vintage, interestingly, of Cederberg was the Fairburn, which is now known as the Old Mutual Trophy Show. That's Michael Friedjohn's wine competition, probably the most established local wine competition with bringing in international judges. You know, very credit-worthy competition with great palates judging it. And this was the trophy winner for the best red wine in, I think, 2004 or something at that competition. So, you know, once again, they look at a lot of entries. There would be probably between 150 and 200 entries of Shiraz in a competition like that. And then this would have been the wine that stood out as the best in the flight. And, you know, the price point of this, you could pick it up for, I think at the moment, for around 400 Rand a bottle. And it's an 18-year-old legendary Shiraz. It's, you know, the wines from the Cederberg, they're high altitude, so they always have a great natural acidity. They're certainly not light. They're not, I wouldn't call them cool climate. The Cederberg gets warm enough, but they They have wonderful natural acidity because of the diurnal, the temperature drop in the evenings and in winter. So the wines retain this freshness for a long time. David Nieuwoud is a masterful hand, and this wine will still be drinking wonderfully. I think that's a little steal.
So shall we go to maybe Savage? That could be quite a nice counterpoint as well to make sure we talk about, and then we can move into Sardi after that. But Duncan Savage was a Sauvignon Blanc producer. Let's admit he was at Cape Point Vineyards for a very long time. And he cut his teeth there and he made his name there. But in about 2012, he went on his own. And again, if we talk about more lighter styles, then Savage is certainly that. He enjoys the more classic style of wine. But we've got to follow the line 2015 there, which is a Cinsault-based wine. And that's also a Rhône variety, is Cinsault. And really, there's a Cinsault revolution going in South Africa. And I had a 2014 a couple nights ago, and it was remarkably fresh and fragrant and floral. And in fact, it reminded me more of Pinot Noir than it did of a Rhône Valley wine. So if you like a lighter style, that Follow the Line is an incredible wine. And then his Savage Red is Shiraz based, and that's a bit richer and more powerful. But really, Savage is part of the new wave. He's one of the great new winemakers in South Africa. And if you like that new wave, more hip sort of, more elegant styling, then the Savage is where you should be looking at.
Yeah, it's one of the producers that if you look at the young guns or the new age of producers in South Africa, the guys don't necessarily all come from a family line or a heritage of owning land. They own a brand and then they source vineyards, and this has really sort of opened up the Cape vineyards to the talent of the winemaking talent, and bringing those two together has been part of what's revolutionized fine wine. And Savage is one of those players. So he doesn't own vineyards, but he goes and hunts. He literally looks for the best and preferably older vineyards around all over the place. So to Follow the Line name comes from somebody giving him directions to how to find the vineyard, and somebody said, just follow die ou telefoonlyn, volg net die pale tot by die wingerd. So someone gave him the directions to just follow the line to the vineyard, basically. So, and that's how he found that Cinsault vineyard. And there's wonderful stories with these wine producers with fishing out these great vineyards and then offering the producers double the price they have been selling the fruit for, and then that makes the grower very happy, and they're putting the great quality into bottles. So yeah, Savage certainly a great inclusion. That Follow the Line also got 96 points from Tim Atkin. It's great wine. The Savage Red 2015 was released after the 16, so it's a slow aging, tight red wine. So yeah, both of these will be great purchases.
I mean, and
Matthew, should we finish off with the Sardi? Have we still got some time?
Just a question. I mean, with a bid on 2,800 Rand, if you were budding collectors yourselves, or I mean, because you're not budding, your palates are well established and your cellars are not going dry anytime soon. But so if you suggestion for new collectors, would you take something like that, and how long would you put that on the shelf for?
Well, this is, if I can take that one, Higgo, we don't really know how long this is going to age, because what I was going to talk about with Sardi is that some of these vineyards, and in fact, most of them were going into box wine before going into some of these labels. And the only reference point they have is maybe in the 60s and 70s, where someone like, or a producer like Swartland Cobb used to make single cultivar Cinsault. And we've been lucky enough to drink some 74, 73 Swartland Cobb Cinsault, which is incredible 40 years down the line. So we just don't know how long these wines are going to age. What we do know is that there's really high quality fruit. The wines are made more naturally, that they're respecting the farming, they're respecting the terroir, they're respecting the winemaking, and they're not over oaking it or picking it too ripe. So there is a lot of scope here for these wines to age. And if they age 50 years, I don't think anyone's going to be surprised, Matthew.
Amazing. So shall we go and look at the Sardi family? And again, as we do this, I just want to, because the guys pointed out to me that this is a really helpful way to navigate the website. So on our wine producers website, so if you go to our sale and you click in the producers tab, it'll take you to this screen. And if we want to see all of the lots now produced by the Sardi family, we're going to go click onto this blue arrow here, and that's going to take us to all of the Sardi lots. Now, this is really, I suppose, one of the signatures of the sale, and an emerging signature within South African wine.
Yeah, maybe Higgo's already spoken a bit about the Columella. This wine is impossible to find. You can't find the current vintage, you can't find back vintages. So to have all this on the sale, I'm delighted that there's so much available, and you can see that the prices are starting to hit those upper estimates, and I think they'll overcome them with some time as well. But what we must also highlight is the Old Vine series, and in 2009, Eben put his neck out, and he literally made the series of single vineyards from old vines that he'd found, and that then was a set which we've auctioned off before on Strauss, but later on it got moved to these new labels, Pofadder, Soldat, Trainspoor, and Te Voetpad and the like, and they've become the most sought after wines in South Africa. Impossible to find, they're sold on allocation, and they're incredible old single vineyards, and you can see that there's some good bidding on them as well. One must understand the character of these wines, though. They're not big, sweet, oaky wines. They're very elegant, pure, more savory in style. In fact, if you were to taste them blind, you would probably look more towards Spain or France than South Africa. It's really opened up South Africa to a new way, a new theme of wines.
So just a shot in the dark for both of you. This is going to be quite interesting. So I'm going to pit your palates against each other and say, within the Sardi range, where would either of you start? Or is it a consensus between the two of you, which is the finest selections here, or is it really up to taste? So let's go with Roland. Roland, a selection of one of the lots out of the Sardi family. Where would you start, I suppose, on your
Yeah, that's a tricky one. Well, look, we've only got the Rhône varieties here. So we've got, obviously, the Columella, we've got the Pofadder and the Soldat. The Pofadder is Sanso, and the Soldat is Grenache. Now, we haven't traditionally made a lot of great Cinsault and great Grenache. So those probably be the one I'll be looking at. And the Soldat 15, really good vintage. Grenache is regarded as the Pinot Noir of the South. It can be extremely deep, complex, engaging, and fine. That would be my pick. Higgo?
Probably Columella, just because of it being a blend. So the winemaker's hand comes through. So as I mentioned earlier, the current trend for the best winemakers in the world is to make it. It's probably become a little bit of a tired marketing term when my winemakers say they do as little as possible, or they intervene as little as possible. But Ibn Sardi is certainly one of those producers that do that. So they try to let the vineyard express. But where the winemaker's hand and skill then does come in very strongly is in blending. And Columella is a blend of the vintage specific or vintage dependent of like up to about 10 varieties in the blend. So Roland mentioned earlier the varieties in the Rhône Valley in France. If you look at an area like Chateau Libertas, I think it allows up to about 13 different varieties in the blend. So that's really where the master stroke comes in of the winemaker, and I think that maybe just trumps the Old Vine series single variety wines in terms of complexity because of all of this blending components in the wine. That's why my choice would be with Columella. But in terms of drinking wine, something sipping at home, Pofadder is incredible. I mean, Cinsault has just had a wonderful revolution in South Africa. And if you look at another wine that we've sold at Strauss auctions already last year, the Chateau Libertas, a famous South African wine, one of the first South African red wines to be exported. Chateau Libertas, now 1940s, 1950s, these wines are still drinking great. And what's the major blend components in Chateau Libertas? None other than Cinsault. So if you look at the ageability of Cinsault, it is staggering. You taste the wine young and it's fruity and it doesn't look complex, but they just keep and age and wonderfully. So I think Pofadder, yeah.
Matthew, is there one last lot we can talk about? I'd love to talk quickly about the Mount Sutherland.
Yeah.
Okay, so this is an incredible vineyard, folks. This is in Sutherland itself, at one of the highest vineyards in South Africa, and they have serious snow in winter. So they have a continental climate like nowhere else in South Africa, and really continental climates make a different style of wine. They retain the acidity, they retain the structure, and this is quite a sad story because they had black frost in this vineyard a couple of years ago, and it completely killed the vineyard, it decimated the vineyard. So after 2016, I don't think there will be any more Mount Sutherland Syrah. But if you like Rhône style, and if you're looking for something different, this is an incredible wine. It's got something extra to it that some of the other wines don't have. There's almost a saline, herby character that you get from the Sutherland Syrah, and something very unique and very, very rare, and one of my favorite picks for sure.
Amazing. So now, guys, I just want to open up to any questions that we might have from the audience, and that'll give us an opportunity to jump around. I know we've had one chat just saying that somebody was commenting that Ibn Sardi feels in the tradition of South African winemaking more like an artist than like a winemaker. He's given such a unique voice to that. So I'm going to thank you again for that comment. And then I think somebody, the same visitors just sending us through a SoundCloud interview with Eben. So I'm going to share that. I'm going to share that on the group just while we're here, because I think it might be it's just a nice addition to the conversation. Higgo, I was interested just while we were. I feel that we weren't. I hadn't quite done with you on the Colmenella questions, because I mean, you know, we've got. I suppose you've got that vertical Colmenella. 2003 to 2006. Then you've got a 2008, and then you've got a 2013. Out of those, say for a collector again, obviously, you know, there's a difference in price, but where would you, what do you think what is the different characters between those years, those vintages?
So it's so much down to personal taste in terms of what you like, which is why we stress the point of the stylistic difference very often between Syrah and Shiraz. But I think the buyer needs to almost find his own way and find his own golden stream. But personally, I like the younger expressions of Columella. The reason being, Ibn has also evolved as a winemaker from 2000 to his latest vintages. He admits it himself that in the beginning he was also chasing, you know, at the time Robert Parker was still a big influence on the international wine scene. People were trying to chase a little bit more ripeness, more boldness, more expression, more extraction, to just get more power out of the fruit and more more taste in the glass would be a simple way to put it. And eventually, as he's found himself and as he's found these vineyards, he started to become much more delicate and more pure and more focused. So I think the later vintages for me personally are better ones. So I'd probably look at the 2013, and it also happens to be at a lower price point. So I think that's a good steal. 2013 isn't a standout Cape vintage, but you know, if you look at the great winemakers, they're able to make great wines in lower vintages as well, because they're able to use the vintage and have that as a resonance of personality in the wine, rather than trying to muscle a style into a vintage.
Now, if I could just comment that 2008, Matthew, that's a cracking wine. It's a lighter vintage, and it's a very elegant style of Columella, and that would be my pick.
Oh, really? Now, so just out of interest, so I suppose this is sort of needling you guys a little bit for sort of information. But when you say standout South African vintages, what determines a standout South African vintage?
Probably I'm looking for the term, but like if there's enough producers declaring a good quality vintage, or enough areas declaring good quality vintage, and you know, this is part of the reason that we're doing this initiative with Strauss. Is I think we're only starting to take ourselves as a serious and as a fine wine producer in South Africa. Because what needs to start happening is we can't talk about great vintages across the Cape, because the Little Karoo and the Cedarburg and Elim might not have a great vintage, but then Stellenbosch and Paul and Franschhoek might have a good vintage. So what I'm talking about is the specific focus of areas starting to say, okay, we have a good vintage. I think when you're declaring a good vintage is when there's a critical mass of producers starting to say they've had favorable conditions, and then the critics following suit with saying that the wines are really tasting well. And there's probably around 2 or 3 per decade that really stand out as top vintages in the Cape.
What are just for people to sort of keep their ears up? What are some of the standout vintages?
Well, it's, again, I mean, Matthew, it's difficult to say because a lot of these wines are not only from Stellenbosch. So 2013 was pretty good in Swartland, but it wasn't a great vintage in Stellenbosch. But if you're going to go back the last 20 years, 2003, 2005, 2009, 15, 17, those are the regarded as the great vintages. But again, if you've got an early ripening variety like Pinot Noir and a late ripening variety like Cabernet, you might have late rains which have influenced the Cabernet but don't influence the Pinot Noir, and vice versa. So it's impossible to actually paint every vintage with the same brush.
So it's really up to doing research on region.
Well, it's drinking, Matthew. That's really what it is. It's drinking.
Well, that's I suppose the favorite, one of our favorite parts of this. And just with 5 more minutes to go, gents, there was one more question up. So somebody's asking, when the buyers are setting, when buyers are setting the price through auction, what factors influence that price with South African wine? I suppose what the question, just in a summation of a question, what goes about sort of, as you said earlier or alluded to earlier, we've got a system where the producers are really, I suppose, setting market values. And how does the auction reveal the mechanizations behind that?
I'll take that one quickly, Matthew, because we saw it quite succinctly with the Canon Paul Sour 2015. And before that, really, you could buy a Canon Paul Sour, maybe from a good vintage, you'd pay a little bit more than from a lesser vintage. But 15 came along and Tip Atkin gave it 100 points, first time ever for a South African wine. That wine tripled in price within the same year. And that's never happened before for South African wine. And that was really just one vintage that got an incredible score. So if you were to go to France, for instance, or in another open market and trade on Bordeaux wines, and you bought an 82 versus an 81 Chateau Libertas, you're going to pay 3 times more for the 82 than for the 81. And that's because over 30 years of tasting these two wines, we know that the 82 is much better than the 81. And again, this is where the maturity of the industry needs to play its role. We need more information out in the market. We need more wines out in the market so that we're all drinking, tasting, enjoying these wines and figuring out which ones are the best ones. And once we know which ones are the best ones, obviously, those ones should be more expensive and more sought after.
So now, I mean, just out of interest to sort of a structural, sort of a structural thing, how that information is, I suppose, fed into the market is quite interesting. So we get sort of certified collectors and dealers like yourselves, and how is that? Obviously, you guys make notes and people taste, and we've got critics' picks and reviews and things. But how is that kind of? Is it word of mouth that's traded in the industry, or is there a what's the kind of guidebook that people can sort of go, or is it really just about research and tasting?
There isn't a guidebook, Matthew. This is part of why we're doing this. This is one of the first initiatives to set up a transparent, objective platform for determining price. It is literally the first time that we're taking fine wines from private collections as well. So that's establishing a secondary market. So if you're looking at one of South Africa's most famous, probably ageable red wine brands would be Miller's Rubicon. If you ask any experts in the industry what should be the price for Rubicon in the 80s vintage specific, there's going to be it'll be different prices depending on who you ask. So it hasn't really been formalized, and I think it's not a sign of us not being organized as an industry. We have to realize we're still quite young, post 94 as a fine wine industry, and really sort of post 2000s, mid 2000s as becoming a real fine wine focus. So I think this is one of the evolutions of the industry to now starting to establish price points in a proper way. At the moment, it's probably mostly been set by current vintage release of producers. So if we're trying to establish, look at the wine like Follow the Line. I mean, that's selling for, at the moment, the price points on the auction is around 500 Rand a bottle. That's certainly undervalued if you look at the quality of the wine. That wine is worth a lot more. As I said, Tim gave it 96 point. That wine is going to age for a long time. But the current vintage release of that wine, of the Follow the Line, is only around 300 Rand. Roland, correct me if I'm wrong. I think it's around 300. So we can't go and now say the wine is 3,000 Rands worth, even though it might be on quality inside the bottle. The brand hasn't really evolved. It's a young brand. It's a young release. So it's not something that's built up the reputation and the provenance of being there. But quality-wise, it certainly should be selling for more.
Just to quickly follow on that, the Chateau Libertas, folks, once it hits the market, it triples in price. So once it gets allocated through all the merchants around the world, it literally triples in price because the world sees it as cheap. And that hasn't really happened in South Africa. Maybe Sardi is the first one where it sells out immediately on allocation. And if there's a secondary market for it, you can see those prices jump. So the Old Vine series, yes, it's the same as Higgo said, is maybe 300 Rand a bottle retail, but quite quickly it jumps to 500-600 Rand a bottle on the auction because that's really what the demand is for those wines.
So this is just the example of the Chateau Libertas that we're looking at, and we can see that this has got the most attention on our sale with coming in above bidding and coming in above estimates. And gentlemen, there was a comment. I'm just going to share the screen just so you can all see the lot I'm talking about. This is the Chateau Libertas this has sort of got the most attention on our auction with coming in above its estimate. But now, gentlemen, you guys were saying that. So I suppose this is a bit of a two-parter question here. Well, one more of an observation and a second part of question. One, that you were saying that price, even though it's above its estimates here, is roughly concomitant to market value abroad. First question, and two, one of the other questions is how would producers in South Africa benefit from this new way of collecting setting prices, or will it just be mostly in aid of the consumer or the collector?
Roland, if you can maybe take the international prices, and then I'll comment on how it benefits producers.
Sure. Yeah. So really the world of fine wine is changing, and it has changed over the last 10-15 years with the rise of technology, the internet, where markets like India, China, South America are starting to drink fine wine. And that has just raised the interest for fine wine. And it's not like one can replicate Chateau Libertas. There's only a certain amount of it out there. So once the demand exceeds the supply, that's when you have the prices start shooting up. And that hasn't really happened in South Africa yet. We don't have international collectors going, I need my Columella, and it's quickly jumping in price on the open market. So we're getting there. We're getting the points. We're getting the interest, but we're just not quite getting the demand quite yet. So once we've achieved that, that's when it's going to affect then the release prices of the current vintage, which is what Higgo will talk about.
Yeah, so if you look at how, I mean, the impression or the standard of products is not only determined by the supply, it's obviously, as you know, also determined by, or the reputation of it is determined by the demand as well. And an initiative like this would benefit South African producers in the sense that, we're creating a more serious platform that then pulls that supply along. So a very good example of it is if you look at the reputation of now very well established producing zones like Bordeaux or Champagne. They weren't only created by the likes of Bordeaux and Champagne, they were created by international markets, very notably the United Kingdom, and then subsequently the Far East, etc., and the US. So if we start as a substantial platform here, start taking our supply seriously, then that elevates the whole of the industry. And what we've done very specifically is to unbiasedly just look for the top South African wines. So we don't make any compromises there. There's no favoritism. They organize into themes, but they will always be the best wines that we have had access to in terms of what's come our way on a supply side.
Fascinating. And so would you guys just, if I were to say, give us a shopping basket for sort of the days of the week of the sale. So I'm sort of I suppose some closing thoughts is if you were to have I suppose this is a game that I've been playing with some friends, but if you were to have a bottle of wine for each day of the week as a sort of a light wine to start off for Monday through to Friday, give us your 5 picks from the sale.
We haven't been able to talk about all the producers, sadly, because there are a few that I would love to speak at length about. Rhône, for instance, is the leading organic wine in South Africa, but even if it's not organic, it's one of the greatest wines in South Africa. Incredible, visceral, classic style of wine. We didn't talk about Luddite. Luddite, the bigger, richer style from 2005. That's an incredible lot and not expensive. And then Kearmont as well, one of the great producers of Syrah in South Africa. So those would be my sort of under the radar 3 picks.
Okay.
Yours, Higgo?
Yeah, no, definitely. I also had Kearmont on my list. I think it's not being picked up. The Kearmont, that's a wonderful little wine. The Kearmont Syrah 2012. Many consider that to be one of the best producers of Syrah in the country. They're right next door to the Trafford. They're in that beautiful Blauwklippen Valley in Stellenbosch, and Alex Terry there makes delicate, just wonderfully perfumed, almost cooler sight Syrah for Stellenbosch. So that's a great little lot. And then there's the David and Nadia Grenache, 2015 top vintage of that wine. And that's a super light, ethereal wine, 100% Grenache. I think it comes from the Swartland. I'm not 100% sure, but this is another wine that probably flies under the radar a little bit. This is David Sardi, who's been probably one of the next wave after the producers we mentioned earlier, the Ibn Sardi and Adi Bardenhorst and the Mullinies, etc. David Sardi and maybe Jonathan Roll and so forth followed just shortly after as the next generation of Swartland producers. And David Sardi is now well established as one of the top producers in the country. And his Grenache is very unique in the style. It's super light. It's very light in color. If you love Pinot Noir, then maybe this is a wine that you should go for. And the 2015 is still super young, but it's also a wine that you can't get your hands on. Then another wine maybe to mention that is not getting a lot of attention is the La Motte, the Pyrenees range, the Syrah Viognier. So
you get any artwork with that, Higgo?
Sorry?
No, I'm just kidding.
Oh, no, you're not getting a Pyrenees with the wine. No, unfortunately not. But there is something on the label, I think, on the back label at least. Or I think maybe in the wraparound in the box or something, there'll be a bit of Pyrenees print. But this is a wonderful wine. It's completely underrated. This wine won the IWC Trophy, International Wine Challenge Trophy. That's a London-based competition where I judge at. You literally taste hundreds of wines a day, and there's, 50 panels tasting wines. To get a trophy at that competition is incredibly hard to come by. So that's a wonderful little pickup. The 2005, it's 15 years old, but it's still going. And they blend in a little bit of Viognier, which is typical what's done in the Northern Rhône. So it makes the wine a little bit more floral, a little bit more perfumed. So I think that's also wine that's flying under the radar. And then another producer we haven't really touched on is the Neil Ellis wines. So there's a little collection of single vineyard wines from Neil Ellis, from Jonkershoek, from Groene Kloof and Darling. And I'm not sure what the third one is, the third site, but this is also a wonderful producer, you know, very well established. Neil Ellis was one of the first producers in the country, if not the first, to go beyond the estate wine model and look for vineyards all around the country and then put them under his label. And typically he's done that at Groene Kloof with Sauvignon Blanc and Syrah, and that's just outside of Darling. That's cool climate, Syrah. And then the Jonkershoek Syrah is from 2005 vintage, and the 09 top vintage Peens Kloof. That's where it's basically a gunfight for Peens Kloof old vines, Grenache at the moment. That's the place to be buying your Grenache grapes from, is in the Peens Kloof, just outside of Citrusdal, 2009 top vintage. Those knowing Neil Ellis would know that he makes his wine more sort of new world, modern expression.
But they age very well. There you go.
But they do keep very well, exactly. Yeah, I mean, he's a classy winemaker. These wines are certainly missing the attention they deserve.
Last producer, and Jürgen, thanks for highlighting that. The Lismore wines, folks. Lismore burnt down in the fires in the Overberg a couple months ago, and you know, it's great to have just 2 lots on there. Widely acclaimed as the best Viognier producer in South Africa, and the Syrah are very peppery and very Rhône style, and it'll be great if these wines sell well. They're great wines, but also, you know, there's something else going on behind this brand. She's really had to start from zero once again to restart her brand.
Yeah, no bio